Welcome back to Decode Silicon Valley. It is really a tangled web that we have woven for ourselves. Do we have a way out? Today, we're going to focus on our continued look into decoding Silicon Valley. We're going to look specifically into the woke movement as a lunch. That's it. We're going to highlight this and move on. San Francisco's wise decisions around that. And then who is paying our bills? Okay, let's get started here. We all learned of the term get woke, go broke. What does that mean? Not going to go into the depths of it here because we're all familiar with that. But it's a series of decisions that necessarily haven't been supported for society, supportive for society. So let's take a quick look at San Francisco as an example. On this, I drove up there just last week once again, went over by the federal building, cut across to Van Ness and then out towards Fort Mason. And when you cut across from the federal building out towards Van Ness, which would have been the cut through if they did a freeway in the city and they never did. So that's the main road for those of you who are not familiar with the city. It's drug alley. People dressed in all sorts, whether they had their belongings in a cart or they had a nice suit on, were buying and selling right there on the street as we drove by. A number had already collapsed on the sidewalk. It's beyond sad at this point. Where did this come from? And it's being encouraged. Okay, so San Francisco is facing surging crime. You name it, they got it there. But you know what they don't really seem to have is this little thing right here. If you can see my cursor moving, some reason they don't have that. Okay. So I wanted to look at some other issues here, and it looks like some of the tags may have moved. But there's the San Francisco florist desperate for staff, puts up a sign saying that anybody shows up, they're going to hire. Now, they didn't even go and get the right sign, right? They just pulled down an image and popped it in here. But the fact is, San Francisco's businesses are closing. Even CVS shut another series of stores, and London Breed, the mayor, stepped up and said, look, it has nothing to do with the lack of police or the break-ins or the thefts or the looting. It's just a business decision. Yes, the business decision was because of your city politics. But here there's a note that a San Francisco florist whose store is understaffed says he will literally hire anyone who shows up. People don't want to live in the city. They don't want to go to the city. And if they've got a choice, they have already long fled. Companies desperate to hire have been lowering their criteria just to catch anybody breathing. Isn't that sad in this day and age? Now, I'll point out, somebody might suggest, hey, doesn't Pelosi live in San Francisco? She has a home there. I don't know how much she still resides there. Most of her time is spent over the bridge or wherever she is with her shackles. I don't know that situation. But you can go down the list of tech executives who all have homes. And yes, they absolutely do in that area, but they have them up on Lion Street and Sutter and up at the peak above the Divisadero goes parallel to Van Ness, and it intersects a series of main streets up at the top of the hills. You don't push shopping carts up the hills, so they're safe from most break-ins. Most of them also have private security on their streets, as does Pelosi's neighborhood that's converted into a private area, even though it is not. However, they still have to drive out of those areas to get to their helicopters. It's pretty bad coming down out of the city right now. So let's continue here. We've got it looks like a number of my, I've got to pause a moment and actually bring this up. I don't know what to happen to the tags as we move through this, but I wanted to put up San Francisco, oops, Union Square looting. There's two that I need to pull up here for the purposes. Okay, so last week we saw another whole series of lootings in San Francisco. This is getting more serious. News is not really covering the highlights of these gangs that are literally rotating from city to city, posting on social media that they'll be gathering at a specific location, and then like a rolling stone, it kind of gathers as it goes along. Social media, to my knowledge, is not taking these down. They have no problem with their algorithms tracking keywords that they don't want, yet they can't seem to stop the flow of these gangs that are moving from city to city nationwide and are now really in mass here in California, specifically the Bay Area. So as they continue to grow, then I wanted to show you one other, if this one will pop up here. San Francisco restaurant owner takes the cake. And I got to tell you this, when I saw this, I about floored. This restaurant owner, and you can Google it, CBS, I think, was the first one to show it. This one is a MSNBC if you want to pull it up. San Francisco police officers denied service at a restaurant. You know why? Because it's a safe space and these people felt uncomfortable with the weapons. Do police officers go in swinging machetes or weapons out in the open? No, they are clean and tidy in uniform. They always have their weapons absolutely secured, and having their presence in a neighborhood used to be wanted because that would deter, at least in that moment. And yet these woke individuals decided they didn't want that. They wouldn't stand for it. So kick them out. They said, you're more than welcome to come back when you're off duty. What kind of brilliance is that? Yet these are the same individuals that are going to be calling the police when something happens. So this is, as I have stated time and time again, the epitome of Gotham City. It is a city that is run by criminals and being eaten alive. Now, we remember years ago, this is where New York had been. And they came in and they cleaned up that city and they brought in big money. They brought in big business. They brought in all kinds of investors. It turned around. And look where New York City is today after just, we haven't even approached 1 year yet, right? 1 year of devolution at a rapid scale. I wanted to continue on this topic of who's paying our bills. So if this is the status of one of the major towns, that they don't want police in their businesses to even be patrons, they're supplying and looking the other way for drugs and crimes and looting. They're driving businesses out of their city. They can't even get workers, breathing or not. And yet the statistics show that we're at a 4.6% unemployment rate. Now we all know that numbers don't lie. This is the truth of this number, but people do, and that's why we have statisticians who spend their entire career manipulating the data. 4.6%. So let's look at the flip side of this. Here we have multiple, and they're highlighting there was a huge peak here. Do you think that all these individuals at each peak went back in to their same job? The answer is no. After you lose a job and in mass, it is very difficult to jump back into the same job at the same pay. Often you got to start over. And starting over means maybe you don't have benefits for your family. Maybe that means you've got to move. Maybe instead of that $300,000 a year job, you're now making 20 bucks an hour. And so if you look at the peak of each one of these, all of these are left behind. So they keep correcting the data to pull it back down. Yet when I worked for the Office of Economic Development at City of San Jose, we always posted during the dot-com bust. I think at one point we may have brushed upon 8%, but we always kept it down around 4 to 6% because otherwise they stated it would cause panic. Yet we all knew, just based on looking at our neighborhoods and who was employed and who was not, who was losing their home and who was not, that at least 30% were unemployed, at least. And yet the numbers kept getting massaged, as they might say. So let's look at the flip side. Here I asked the question, what is the unemployment rate? Okay, let's look at what the employment rate is. In 2019 in the United States, they show the employment rate. So this was before even this last 2 years of whatever you want to classify it that we've gone through of this world we're living in. The employment rate going into that, which was the best that we've ever seen under that particular Mr. T, had brought us to that point for lifelong goal in the United States, was 155 million people employed. Okay, so what does that translate to? That's 155 million people. So let's look at the other side of this. How many people consider that they're residents in the United States? Now, this does not include the millions that we've had creep over the borders this last 10 months, not even a year. It seems like years, but how many people have crept over the border? This is just, again, this is stating 2021. Usually their numbers are a couple years behind. This was stating here 2020 population. So this is an estimate in 2021 of 333 million. Okay, if you got 333 million as a population, and you've got 155 million working, 150 times 2 is 300,000. So you've got less than 1 of every 2 people working in the United States. 1 of every 2. Now I'm working, I'm fully employed. Yet my income has dropped so drastically over the last decade that we've been in survival mode for 11 years. Coming from the top, buying multiple homes, living a really nice life, to barely having the funds to get through to feed my family. And yet I'm considered working. So I'm over here, I'm in this population right here. In many years, I don't even make enough to pay taxes, but I'm considered working. And I'm working my ass off, you better believe that. But here, 1 of every 2 people working. So let's look at this. How many students, K through 12 in the United States? In 2019, we had about 56, 57 million students, elementary to secondary, so that would be K through 12, that are presumed not working. Under 18, they don't count in those stats anyways, that are just sucking off the taxpayer because it's a free ride. And this year, every child is getting free food. Every child got free laptops in California, free Wi-Fi, free clothes if they needed it, free rides to school, free resources. You can't even ask them to bring a pencil, otherwise that is discriminatory. Free tutoring, free this, free that. It is an absolute roll the red carpet out for the elite of the elite right now if you are a student. So this is 56 million people not working. This counts adults of 333 million. And yet the estimate is 155.76 million people, less than 1 of 2 actually working. So who is paying our bills? It's beyond me at this point. I'm noticing that quite a few tabs were wiped down as I went live, and that's an interesting data point. But one of the other things I wanted to point out here was after Gotham City, U.S. National Guard, Army lied. This article came up this morning. This is posted an hour ago. Ex-National Guard official says the Army generals lied to Congress. There are no consequences to being truthful under oath anymore in this country. And if they're not expected to tell the truth, why are you expected to tell the truth? And yet that is the whole crux of this hearing, is who is telling the truth. And yet they lied to Congress, alleging that the support that was called in was withheld. Now we had Roger, with the last name of Stone, report this week as well that the Secret Service offered to escort him over to the Capitol on that day. Now he's already had a strike, right? He had them visit him, not the Secret Service, but the FBI, visit him at his home in Florida in the wee hours of the morning, doing one of those shock bang kind of flashbang style entrances into his home, and arrest him. Now they tried to escort him on over to a location where they were doing a big scoop. Which side is lying and which side is telling us the truth? And who is actually paying our bills? They're not getting paid. This is why all that money is just being printed and printed and printed. So I ask again, just as I did in yesterday's video. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. Do you know where your retirement fund is? Because if it's in a 401k, It's long gone out of this country and it ain't coming back. All right, so this whole step of getting woke and going broke is taking down this country. And we're very grateful for the devolution process that we know is in place that is actually our safety net and will save us. Time to study now as we learn more about decoding Silicon Valley. It's a tangled web.